Tonight, you are 19 years old, standing beside a smoky campfire somewhere in Virginia during the winter of 1863. Snow drifts slowly across the dark countryside while thousands of soldiers sleep beneath worn blankets stretched over frozen ground. The war has already lasted far longer than anyone expected. Back in 1861, politicians promised quick victories, glorious marches, and triumphant returns home before Christmas. Several Christmases have now passed, and the only thing arriving on schedule is disappointment. Somewhere beyond the trees, a sentry coughs into the cold night air. Horses shift nervously near supply wagons. The smell of wood smoke hangs over the camp like a heavy blanket. And right now, more than bullets, cannons, or enemy armies, one subject dominates every conversation around every fire: food. History remembers the American Civil War through famous battles and legendary generals. What it often forgets is that most soldiers spent far more time thinking about dinner than military strategy. Hunger followed armies everywhere. It marched beside them through forests, rode with them across muddy roads, and slept beside them beneath freezing skies. Long before a soldier worried about dying heroically in battle, he worried about whether tomorrow's breakfast would contain anything recognizable as food. Tonight's meal arrives shortly after sunset. A cook carrying a battered iron pot moves through camp distributing portions. Men gather eagerly until they actually see what is inside. The excitement fades immediately. Floating in the weak broth are several pieces of heavily salted pork and a handful of beans that appear to have surrendered all hope sometime during the afternoon. Salt pork forms the backbone of military diets throughout the war. Enormous barrels packed with preserved meat travel alongside both Union and Confederate armies. The preservation process is simple. Take pork, cover it with enough salt to preserve a small ocean, seal it inside a barrel, and hope future generations forgive you. Fresh meat spoils quickly. Salt pork survives almost anything. Unfortunately, surviving and tasting good are entirely different achievements. Soldiers often describe the meat as greasy, tough, and astonishingly salty. Some pieces contain more fat than actual meat. Others possess textures that suggest the animal continued resisting long after death. Before cooking, many soldiers soak portions in water to remove some of the salt. This occasionally helps. Usually it simply creates slightly less aggressive salt pork. Around the campfire, veterans trade stories about better meals from home. One man remembers his mother's chicken stew. Another describes fresh biscuits covered in butter. A third spends 10 uninterrupted minutes discussing apple pie with the emotional intensity normally reserved for lost romance. Hunger does strange things to memory. Ordinary meals become legendary feasts. Simple kitchens transform into sacred places. As darkness settles over the camp, letters from home circulate among the soldiers. Families write about harvests, birthdays, weddings, and daily life continuing far away from the war. Many letters include descriptions of food: homemade bread, roasted turkey, vegetable gardens, fresh milk. These details comfort soldiers while simultaneously making them miserable. Reading about proper meals while chewing preserved pork is like receiving a postcard from paradise while trapped inside a snowstorm. The following morning brings another march. Soldiers pack their belongings before dawn and begin moving south through frozen countryside. The road quickly dissolves into mud. Wagons become stuck repeatedly. Horses struggle. Men complain continuously. Complaining, historians suspect, may have been the most universal military tradition of the Civil War. Around midday, the column halts briefly beside a stream. Soldiers immediately search for anything edible. Some gather nuts from nearby trees. Others attempt fishing. A few optimistic individuals examine suspicious plants with the confidence of men who clearly lack experience with poisonous vegetation. One veteran wisely observes that the war has transformed thousands of ordinary Americans into amateur hunters, fishermen, botanists, and occasionally accidental poison victims. As the march continues, rumors spread through the ranks about supply shortages ahead. Entire railroad lines have been damaged, warehouses captured, bridges destroyed. The Army's food situation may soon become worse, much worse. Most soldiers dismiss the rumors at first. Armies always complain about supplies. Then 3 days later, the rations are reduced. Nobody laughs anymore. The portions shrink noticeably. Salt pork becomes scarcer. Bread arrives less frequently. Coffee grows limited. Suddenly, every conversation revolves around food. Men discuss meals they would order if given unlimited money. They debate the greatest breakfast in American history. Arguments begin over whether fried chicken is superior to roast beef. One near fistfight erupts over the proper preparation of biscuits. Hunger has effectively transformed the entire army into an angry cooking club. Yet despite the shortages, life continues. Soldiers march. Camps move. Battles loom in the distance. Somewhere ahead, generals prepare plans that may determine the future of the nation. Meanwhile, thousands of ordinary soldiers kneel beside campfires, staring sadly into bowls of thin soup, wondering whether the beans floating inside count as vegetables or simply evidence that somebody made a mistake. And as another cold night settles across Virginia, one truth becomes increasingly clear. The war is entering a darker phase. Supplies are disappearing. Hunger is growing. And before this conflict ends, many soldiers will discover just how far human beings can stretch a meal when survival becomes more important than pride. The winter deepens as the army continues moving through the battered countryside, and by early 1864, many soldiers have begun measuring time not by battles, but by meals. Unfortunately, meals are becoming increasingly difficult to find. The supply wagons arrive less often now. Roads are damaged, bridges destroyed, and entire regions have already been stripped bare by months of marching armies. Wherever soldiers travel, food vanishes quickly. Fields stand empty. Barns contain little more than dust and memories. Chickens disappear first, then pigs, then anything else unfortunate enough to be edible. Hunger settles into camp life so completely that it becomes almost another soldier marching beside the army. At first, it announces itself quietly through small stomach pains and constant thoughts about food. Later, it becomes far more demanding. Men wake up hungry, march hungry, fight hungry, and fall asleep hungry. Even their dreams begin changing. One soldier claims he spent an entire night dreaming about a loaf of bread so large that it blocked out the sun. Another swears he dreamed of swimming through a river of soup. His friends spend days mocking him for this until someone points out that dreaming about soup is actually becoming alarmingly reasonable under the circumstances. As rations continue shrinking, soldiers begin searching the countryside for alternatives. Officially, this activity is called foraging. Unofficially, it means wandering into the woods, hoping nature forgot to hide something edible. Entire groups spread through forests, carrying rifles and unrealistic optimism. Squirrels become immediate targets. Rabbits fare no better. Wild birds discover that being edible during wartime is a serious design flaw. The forests echo constantly with random gunshots as hungry soldiers interrupt military duties to pursue creatures barely larger than dinner plates. One afternoon, your company halts near a wooded valley crossed by a small creek. Within minutes, dozens of soldiers scatter into the trees. The transformation is remarkable. Men who spent weeks complaining about marching suddenly move with incredible energy once food becomes involved. A private who normally struggles to wake up before sunrise somehow chases a rabbit across half the county without stopping. Hunger, it turns out, is a powerful motivational speaker. By evening, the hunters return, carrying a collection of squirrels, rabbits, fish, and several animals that nobody can identify with complete confidence. The cooks examine the results carefully before making a decision. Everything goes into the same pot. This is another important lesson of wartime cooking. Once food enters a stew, individual identities become negotiable. The resulting meal is surprisingly successful. The broth becomes rich and flavorful. Fresh meat, even unusual fresh meat, tastes infinitely better than preserved rations. Around the fire, soldiers eat enthusiastically while discussing recipes from home. For a brief moment, life feels almost normal again. Then someone asks what exactly they are eating. The cook refuses to answer. Nobody presses the issue. The following weeks bring even stranger culinary adventures. As supply shortages worsen, soldiers become increasingly creative. Cornmeal appears constantly because it remains one of the few ingredients still available in large quantities. It is baked into cakes, boiled into mush, mixed into soups, and occasionally transformed into creations that challenge existing definitions of food. One veteran jokes that if the war continues much longer, they will eventually discover 17,000 different ways to prepare cornmeal and dislike every single one. Yet corn remains valuable because it fills stomachs. During war, nutritional excellence often loses arguments against simple survival. Coffee presents another challenge. Union soldiers receive some supplies, but even there shortages appear regularly. Confederate soldiers face a much worse situation. Real coffee becomes almost impossible to obtain. Entire camps begin experimenting with substitutes. Roasted corn, chicory roots, acorns, peanuts, sweet potatoes, and anything remotely capable of producing a dark liquid finds its way into cooking pots. The results vary dramatically. Some substitutes taste merely disappointing. Others taste like punishment. One soldier describes a particular batch as hot mud with ambition. Another claims his coffee substitute tasted so terrible that it briefly improved his opinion of enemy artillery. Despite this, men continue drinking it. The ritual matters. Every morning, soldiers gather around fires holding steaming cups, pretending for a few moments that life still follows familiar patterns. Beyond the camps, civilians face even greater hardships. Families living near battle zones struggle constantly. Farms have been raided repeatedly. Livestock is scarce. Flour is expensive. Mothers stretch meals in impossible ways, transforming tiny amounts of food into dinners large enough to feed entire families. Soups become thinner, bread becomes smaller, expectations become lower. Yet somehow people continue finding ways to survive. Human beings possess a remarkable talent for adaptation, especially when the alternative is starvation. One rainy evening, while camped beside a damaged railroad line, an elderly farmer visits the soldiers carrying several baskets. The contents immediately attract attention. Apples, real apples, fresh apples. For a moment, the reaction resembles a religious experience. Men gather around staring at the fruit as though it descended directly from heaven. Trades begin instantly. Buttons, tobacco, spare equipment, and nearly anything else becomes acceptable currency. The farmer leaves considerably wealthier. The soldiers leave considerably happier. Never underestimate the emotional impact of fruit after months of military rations. Yet even these small moments cannot hide a growing reality. The war is changing. Food is becoming harder to find everywhere. Supply lines are strained. Cities are suffering. Entire communities are beginning to feel the weight of prolonged conflict. Around campfires, conversations grow quieter. The jokes continue, but less often. Everyone senses that more difficult days lie ahead. Hunger is no longer an inconvenience. It is becoming a weapon. And somewhere beyond the forests and fields, thousands of civilians are about to discover that surviving a war can sometimes be harder than fighting one. By the summer of 1864, the war has stopped feeling temporary. At the beginning, many people believed the conflict would end within months. Politicians promised quick victories. Newspapers predicted glorious campaigns. Young men marched away from home convinced they would return before the seasons changed. Now entire years have disappeared into smoke, mud, blood, and exhaustion. Across large parts of the country, people no longer ask when the war will start ending. They ask how much worse it can become. The answer, unfortunately, is quite a lot. Far from the battlefields, cities and towns begin feeling the full weight of prolonged conflict. Railroads that once carried food across hundreds of miles now sit damaged or destroyed. Bridges lie in rivers. Supply depots have burned. Trade routes that connected communities for generations have collapsed. In some regions, food becomes more valuable than silver. Ordinary families spend entire days searching for ingredients that would have been ignored before the war. Markets still operate, but the stalls look increasingly empty. Prices rise almost weekly. Flour becomes expensive. Meat becomes rare. Sugar practically transforms into treasure. One morning, a woman stands inside a crowded marketplace, hoping to buy enough food for her children. By midday, she has managed to purchase a handful of cornmeal, 2 onions, and a quantity of hope that shrinks with every passing hour. Around her, dozens of other families face the same struggle. Everyone is hungry. Everyone is worried. Nobody knows how long this situation will continue. The cities suffer in their own unique way. Unlike soldiers, civilians cannot simply march somewhere else when supplies run low. They remain trapped alongside the shortages. Entire neighborhoods begin sharing food whenever possible. Neighbors exchange recipes, ingredients, and survival tips. Women become masters of invention. Soups are stretched far beyond their intended limits. Tiny portions become family dinners. Meals that once served 2 people somehow feed 6. It is culinary mathematics performed under impossible conditions. Children feel the changes most clearly. They notice portions shrinking. They notice parents skipping meals. They notice the worried expressions exchanged across dinner tables after dark. Yet childhood continues despite everything. Children still play in streets. They still invent games. They still find reasons to laugh. Human beings possess an extraordinary ability to continue living normally, even while history crashes through the walls around them. Meanwhile, back with the armies, conditions deteriorate further. Summer heat settles over the countryside like a heavy blanket. Rivers shrink. Dust covers roads. Long marches become unbearable. Food remains scarce. Water often tastes questionable. Men complain constantly, which remains one of the few military resources available in unlimited quantities. During one exhausting campaign, soldiers march for nearly 12 hours beneath a blazing sun. Their rations consist of little more than cornmeal and whatever can be gathered along the way. By evening, the camp resembles a gathering of extremely unhappy scarecrows. Uniforms are torn, boots are worn thin, faces are covered in dust. Yet somehow everyone still discusses food. Food dominates every conversation. Food occupies every thought. If an enemy general could somehow transform himself into a roast chicken, the war would probably end immediately. One night, while resting near a small farming community, soldiers hear rumors about a local woman famous for creating meals from almost nothing. Curious and desperate, several men visit her home. What they find seems almost magical. The woman serves stew, bread, vegetables, and even a small dessert. The soldiers stare in disbelief. How is this possible during a shortage? The answer is simple: experience. Years of managing a household have taught her how to waste absolutely nothing. Vegetable scraps become broth. Leftovers become new meals. Tiny amounts of ingredients are combined in ways most soldiers never considered. Watching her cook is like watching a magician perform tricks using onions and determination. The meal becomes legendary. For years afterward, veterans remember it with the same reverence normally reserved for major battles. Yet even such moments cannot hide the larger reality spreading across the nation. Hunger is no longer isolated. It is everywhere. Entire regions struggle. Some towns receive food irregularly. Others receive almost none at all. Families begin planting every available piece of land. Gardens appear behind houses, beside churches, and even in abandoned lots. Anything capable of growing becomes valuable. Potatoes, beans, corn, squash, anything that might become dinner someday. Survival turns everyone into a farmer. Then comes autumn. Normally it would bring relief. Harvest season. Fresh crops. Full storage houses. This year feels different. Too many fields were abandoned. Too many farms damaged. Too many workers absent because they are serving in armies hundreds of miles away. The harvest helps, but not enough. Not nearly enough. One evening, as cold weather begins returning, you sit beside a campfire listening to older soldiers discuss the future. Nobody talks about glorious victory anymore. Nobody talks about adventure. Instead, they talk about home. They talk about families, about kitchens filled with warm bread, about tables crowded during holidays, about ordinary meals shared with people they love. The war has stripped away countless illusions. Most men now understand that peace is not some grand political achievement. Peace is breakfast without worrying where lunch will come from. Peace is a full pantry. Peace is hearing children complain about vegetables because there are vegetables available to complain about. Above all, peace is never having to wonder whether tomorrow's meal exists. As darkness settles across the camp, thousands of similar conversations unfold across the nation. Soldiers, farmers, merchants' mothers, fathers, and children all share the same quiet hope. Not necessarily victory, not necessarily glory, simply enough food, enough rest, enough normal life to begin feeling human again. But the war is not finished yet. One final winter still waits ahead. And before this conflict finally ends, both armies and civilians will